Hi, everybody. It is Chris Grimm, and this is Deep Work Fast. And every Tuesday at 3 o'clock Pacific time, I come on live to LinkedIn and Facebook to bring you tools, ideas, and concepts to help you be the best that you possibly can be at home and at work in all the roles that you play. And I'm laughing right now because we don't know what the tech is doing, but everything's green today. So hopefully, it's not even St. Patrick's Day. And here I am looking very green. Anyway, let's get right to it. This week we dropped a blog, and Heather Mission Control will put it in the chat for you. It's called "Breaking Through the Stall: How Shadow Work Will Propel Your Personal and Professional Growth Forward." And so this is a topic that I wanted to dig into because it is misunderstood by some people. Oftentimes it evokes fear, dissonance if it's mentioned, specifically in work environments. I spend about 70 to 80% of my time with people in the context of their work. And so you mentioned shadow work and people freeze if they've never done shadow work. They don't know what it is. So I want to set the record straight. I want to talk to you about what shadow work is as a concept, what the process might entail, why you should know what it is, why you actually might want to do it, the results that you will get from what's called integrating your shadow. So let's get right to it. But I also just want you to grab that blog. It's a big, long blog, which means about 6 minutes it's going to take you to read it this time instead of 2. It's well worth it. You're probably going to want to go back to it. I am not going to go word for word. I never do that. But I just want to talk with you through it. It's a great resource, and it has other resources embedded in there as links. So first of all, let's just talk about what a shadow is. So forget shadow work. Let's talk about the concept of a shadow. So beyond the normal way of thinking about a shadow, which is, when light is cast on you in the dark and then against the wall or something else, an outline or a shadow of you is there. The idea of a shadow, when we think about personality, or in psychology, I guess, in behavioral approaches like coaching, therapy, CBT, trauma work, etc. When we talk about a shadow, we talk about the part of you that you either hide on purpose or subconsciously, because they are parts of you that you don't want anybody to know about, that you want to distance yourself from. And here's what's important. So as I'm saying this, I know when I have described it to people before, when they've either asked or I've brought it up, usually a healthy person's tendency is to say, oh, I don't have that, right? To assume that the shadow or the dark side of personality and behavior doesn't apply to them, because most of us don't want to actually see those things or admit it. That's why it's a shadow. So I want to first set the record straight, right? That we all have this. And the reason we all have, forget the name shadow, just think about it, parts of us, parts of our personality, characteristics that they're undesirable, right? Like we don't want to use them. We don't want to admit that we do it. And we definitely don't want to, carry a flag and as something we're proud of, because most likely those things are the parts of you, the parts of your behavior, the parts of your thinking, that when you were young, someone told you that they weren't good, right? So think all the way back to when you were a child, or if you're a parent, you can think about your own children. And you just note that when we humans are in our natural state, specifically when we're little, we're not conditioned, right? We're not politically correct. We scream in the middle of a grocery store and throw a tantrum when we want something. We're not refined. We're not following the rules of society. There is no politically correct. And so, if you think about the first 5 years of our life when we're just a little animal being, most likely there are adults around and sometimes other children, like siblings, that correct us. They tell us what not to do. And so, some of those times we might actually be doing something harmful to ourselves or others. We might be doing something unsafe. We might be doing things without thinking. I was just trying to think of some of the examples of the moments in time where we tell kids, hey, don't do that. Now, if you think about that, part of the time it is actually warranted and is to keep the child safe and appropriate, quote unquote, for whatever the context of the situation is. But some of those times it's just the adults wanting the kid to be quiet or wanting compliance so that the adult world that they're in can have whatever the adults think is the right way to behave, right? So, a really great example is asking children to be quiet in church or to act a certain way in a restaurant that might not be natural to the child in their moment in time, their development of the time. But for the adults around, we need them to behave a certain way. So we shush them or we say, sit up, or you can't throw food, you can't do those things. So, what I'm not saying is that the adults are wrong. I am saying that from 0 to 5 in particular, we have a lot of those moments. And if you're in a home where the adults are having their own traumas, maybe there's a lot of stress, maybe there's been great loss, someone lost their job, maybe even a parent passed. So think about that, right? It creates an environment where even normal behaviors from the kids can't be tolerated, maybe for a short period of time, but maybe for a long time. And then, of course, there's more terrible, horrible situations where there's actual trauma and victimization, all of which are creating for the child as an individual messages about who they should and shouldn't be. So this is important, right? Because when we're young, we're highly dependent on the adults around us for our survival. And we want to be loved. We want to more than just survive. We want them to sustainably care about us and we want love and affection. And so we end up taking on beliefs about ourselves and how we should behave. And it becomes patterns, it becomes a part of who we are. So the parts of us that we decide we can't use anymore, well, they're still part of you. They don't go away. And even though we might be trained out of them, they're still there. And so if you think about what happens in our life is that we then, depending on the relationships that we have and the situations that we're in, well, we decide how much people pleasing we're going to do, what rules we're going to follow, what rules we are not going to follow. And all of that continues. It's probably still happening in your life now. I know for me it does, but I think the older we get, the more clear we are about who we are. But not everybody does the work to clarify the parts of themselves that have been pushed down, ignored, repressed, locked away somewhere on the inside until sometimes they start to come out on their own because they just don't want to be hidden anymore, right? That can be something really great, by the way. Like sometimes our shadow self could be a part of you that's highly creative, that doesn't want to sit at a desk job anymore and be on Zoom all day. You want to go paint, you want to go create things. And that part of you wants to come out so much that it starts creating dissonance in your everyday world. And so that's the reason why often it's called a shadow self, because whether it's good or bad, or how deep it is, or what it's related to, sooner or later, it's going to come out. Now, for some people, they have a shadow that ends up coming out in unintegrated ways and causes problems. So we've all seen that. When you see like, the pastor of a mega church and they're out there doing great things, and then all of a sudden we find out they're a sex trafficker, where their shadow life is doing all these bad things. But on the outside, they're presenting as something very presentable, something that society and probably their parents and other people say are good, right? And so when there's a wall between the good version of us and the bad versions of ourselves, or the things we don't want people to know, that's what we call having a shadow self. Now, for most people, like when I'm coaching, I'm always looking at what are the habitual patterns of people's behavior. And I try to help you see it too if I'm coaching you, right? Like, what are you doing that's a pattern? And if it's a pattern that's not working for you, A, do you know it? B, can you stop it? And if you don't know it and you can't stop it, sometimes this shadow work thing comes up. And by the way, in coaching, we don't do a lot of shadow work. We usually refer you to a therapist or a professional that actually does shadow work. So I just want you to know that here's one of those places where I draw some pretty hard lines, but I do help people start to identify, if they don't do it on their own, that you probably need to work on this thing with a professional, because it's seeping out into your world and it's actually creating issues. Now, there's three big, I call them symptoms of an unintegrated shadow self. One is when the person is chronically stressed, totally burned out, and starting to have, or have had for a long time, physical symptoms like can't sleep or disruption of sleep all the time, along with other chronic pain, digestive pain. I think I've mentioned it in other Deep Work Fast, right? Is starting to understand that our gut is called our second brain. So when our body is processing the dissonance of like some version of you on the inside wants to be authentically expressed on the outside, but on the outside, you're still trying to maintain the version of yourself that you need to for your job or for your relationship, etc. Well, when those two things don't talk to each other and aren't integrated, your body's going to have symptoms, right? So I often am like witnessing, like, how is this person? And are they just chronically stressed no matter what they do, and having physical symptoms? The second thing we look at is how much conflict and unmanageability, and I'll explain that in a minute, is taking place in their relationships. So, not uncommon when we get called to coach, people want to be better at work. And so I'm always looking also at what are the patterns in relationships? Like, is this person a chronic self-sabotager? What does that look and feel like? Like, can the person stop themselves, him or herself, from creating situations like drama in their work relationships? Like every team they're on, they are a problem, or they're the person who's known to kind of create drama and problems, right? We look at that. That's not an accident. And sometimes, like I said, it's not behavioral. It's coming from a deeper place. And it can be that this person has just not done the work. That's why we call it shadow work, right? The work is having some professionals help you dig into what of yourself is unintegrated, and what parts of yourself have you continually said, I can't be that person. I can't be that person. I can't be that person. That's not what everybody expects of me. So I'm just going to leave that for someday or never. And like I said, it starts to come out, but instead of coming out in a healthy way, it creates conflict for you on the inside. It creates conflict on the outside. And I mentioned something that you should know is a term, right? Unmanageable in relationships, or creating relationships that are unmanageable, right? So that would be when we choose friends that are reckless, right? That can happen as a teenager, can happen as an adult. Or we take jobs where we already feel unqualified for it, and then we have to rely on a network of people to help either keep us afloat in that situation, right? By asking a lot of other people to help cover for us, or making sure there's lots of people around us so that we can be successful, because we're not sure we can be successful ourselves, right? That's unmanageable. That's not a sustainable way for you to be successful and confident and feel good about yourself. And that's why I call that, that's creating a situation that's unmanageable, with a lot of relationships then where they're not on a foundation of confidence for you. And probably, most likely in the process, something's going to go wrong in the process, and the people are going to doubt you, your credibility will fall. And some people do that over and over again, right? And like I said, the core of that is some unintegrated work. The last thing that we look at, where I can usually see the patterns and know that there's something deeper than the situations themselves, is when I find people who are chronically known as having poor judgment and making bad decisions at work and at home, right? When we do 360-degree feedback, we hear about your brand, right? That's the story people are telling me. Everybody knows the same stories, whether you know it or not. That's why we do 360, by the way, so that you can know. I don't want you to be blind to it. I want you to have that information. And so when we are listening to stories about you, I'm hearing about, is this person a solid decision maker? Do they have good judgment? Are they credible in the way they interact with other people? Are they reliable? And how consistent are those behaviors? Like, is it so consistent it's a part of your brand, whether you know it or want to admit it or not? And how often does it turn into self-sabotage, right? Like, how often are you using those behaviors where the whole situation tends to end badly? Maybe even the way you fear it's going to happen. So those are big signs when I'm learning about people. And I'm saying that to you because I think there needs to be more awareness. I have noticed on social media that there's a lot of people out there, some of which I don't know how qualified they are to do shadow work. And there's a lot of books about it too. Oh, there's the dog. We can't get through Deep Work Fast without a cameo from the dog. Thirsty. Anyway, so the 3 resources I put in the blog are great reads. If this is interesting to you, if it resonates, grab one of those, or grab the book summary for those books, and just start to get familiar with all the different ways it looks and feels when we have an unintegrated shadow. And then I also want you to explore what it looks and feels like to have an integrated shadow. In other words, to know all about ourselves, to accept authentically who we are, what our image is that we're attempting to project all the time. And then who are we when we allow ourselves to be the person that maybe we weren't allowed to be too much when we were young? Right? So if people told you talk too much, or you were too loud, or uh, good girls should be seen and not heard, whatever, there's a ton of those cultural, normative, family norms, whatever. There were rules. And most likely you had to follow them, some of which might have been easy for you, but the things that weren't, and the things that made you change who you are, well, like I said, they don't just go away. So maybe you know all that, maybe you've integrated it, maybe in a healthy way, and maybe not. So grab the resources. I challenge you. This is Deep Work Fast. So, my goal is to bring you tools and ideas and really press some buttons. So if it resonates and you say, I want to know more about that, like I said, it's all over the internet. And sometimes I feel like that's irresponsible for us to be throwing some pretty deep concepts out there without giving you an idea of what it is and why you should care about it. And like the title of the blog, if you've stalled, if you feel like professionally you've plateaued and you don't know why, right? Like, oh my God, I used to be a rock star and now all my old ways aren't working anymore, or my relationships aren't as fertile as they were, or whatever. If you've stalled, you've hit a plateau, you feel like you're hitting a wall, you feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to leave this company to ever get promoted. All of those thoughts, I first say, maybe it just needs a deeper dive into you and the parts of you that maybe need to be expressed in new and integrated ways. So I'll leave you with that. I'm a little bit over time. As always, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next week here on Deep Work Fast. Grab the blog. Don't forget. Okay, bye.